The wealthiest man in your neighborhood doesn't drive a German SUV or wear a six-figure watch. In fact, you likely look right past him every single day. He is a ghost in a world of loud consumption, a man who has mastered the art of structural invisibility to reclaim the only currency that actually matters: absolute autonomy. While the rest of the world is busy performing success for an extraction engine designed to harvest their surplus, he is quietly accumulating the silent power that comes from being the only person in the room who is truly free. Most people mistake the fountain for the reservoir, failing to realize that wealth is not a collection of things you own, but the mathematical measurement of the distance between you and the need for another person's approval. Every status symbol is a leak in the pipes of your freedom, and every luxury is a signal to the system that your surplus is ready for harvest. To survive the coming shifts, you must learn to decouple your survival from the system's permission and embrace the strategy of the invisible. The pattern is already in motion. This pattern is not an accident of personality or a fluke of geography. It is the result of a deliberate structural alignment between behavior and mathematics. We have been taught to conflate riches with wealth, but they are not the same thing. Riches represent an active income stream, often spent to maintain a visible social standing. Wealth is the inverse. It is the silent accumulation of capital that remains invisible precisely because its primary purpose is the acquisition of time rather than the acquisition of objects. Think about what that means. Wealth is the stored energy of suppressed consumption. The conventional narrative suggests that success is a public performance. We are told that a high salary and a luxury lifestyle are the twin markers of achievement. This is an extraction mechanism designed to keep capital in constant motion through the consumer economy rather than in your personal possession. To the system, you are a data point for expenditure. To yourself, you must become a ghost. This extraction mechanism functions through the hedonic treadmill, a psychological trap where every increase in income is immediately met by an increase in lifestyle costs. The neighbor in the German SUV is not enjoying success. He is servicing a debt to the perception of success. Elias has opted out of this cycle. He has embraced the financial ghost strategy, a framework that prioritizes the internal balance sheet over the external display. This is not theory. This is documented behavioral economics. The world rewards those who show their status, but the math rewards those who hide it. There is a hidden architecture to capital accumulation that operates beneath the surface of social expectation. We are going to dismantle the belief that wealth is a performance and replace it with the thesis that wealth is a form of silent power. There are 5 specific mechanisms that allow an individual to accumulate massive capital while maintaining a social profile that suggests mediocrity. These habits are a structural defense against the commercial algorithms designed to extract your focus, your energy, your time, and your funds. We will examine the inverse consumption ratio. We will analyze the social anonymity defense. We will look at the automated systems of accumulation. We will study the weaponization of liquidity. Each block represents a layer of protection for your autonomy. Let me be specific about how these mechanisms function. To understand why Elias is the wealthiest man at that barbecue, you must first understand a fundamental mechanical failure in our collective perception of capital. We have been conditioned to believe that wealth is a display of spending power. We see a luxury car and we think wealth. We see a designer suit and we think success. But in the cold mathematics of personal finance, this is a category error. Most of what we perceive as wealth is actually its opposite. It is the evidence of money that has already been spent and therefore no longer exists as a personal asset. This brings us to the inverse consumption ratio. Here is what that means. It is the mathematical relationship between how much an individual earns and how much of that earnings is converted into lifestyle maintenance. The 1996 Stanley and Danko study proved that the majority of America's millionaires do not live in mansions or drive exotic cars. They are what researchers call the prodigious accumulator of wealth, a term that simply means someone who is exceptionally efficient at converting income into net worth. Contrast this with the under-accumulator of wealth, the person who earns a high salary but spends it all on the performance of status. Think of it like a hydraulic system. A high income is the pressure coming into the pipes. Conspicuous consumption, the public display of luxury, is a leak in those pipes. The more you display, the less pressure remains to drive the actual engine of your freedom. True wealth behaves like a deep underground reservoir. It is silent, static, and invisible. Riches behave like a fountain. They are loud, moving, and visible to everyone. But a fountain eventually runs dry if the pump fails or the water is not recycled. The reservoir remains. This mechanical distinction is why 80% of millionaires are first-generation affluent who drive used Toyotas and Fords. They understand that every dollar spent on a depreciating asset is a dollar that cannot be used to purchase time. You might think that a high salary naturally leads to this kind of security through professional regulation or standard savings accounts. That is true to an extent. And we will examine exactly how those safety nets are designed to fail you. But first, we must look at the psychological fortress that protects this reservoir from the world outside. I promise to return to the mechanical failure of the standard safety net. To see it clearly, we must look at the wreckage of 2008. In the autumn of that year, the global financial architecture trembled. In the glass towers of Manhattan and the sprawling suburbs of Phoenix, a specific class of person was being erased. These were the high-income poor. They were surgeons earning $400,000 a year and senior executives with seven-figure bonuses. On paper, they were the winners of the economy. They drove the right cars and lived in the right zip codes. But when the credit markets froze, their lives collapsed in a matter of weeks. They did not own their homes because the banks held the titles. They did not own their cars because the leasing companies held the keys. They had converted every dollar of income into a signal of status, leaving zero margin for a structural shift. For these individuals, failure was unthinkable until it happened. While this mass evaporation of paper wealth was occurring, a retired janitor named Ronald Reed was sitting in a modest house in Vermont. He was 87 years old. He had spent his life pumping gas and sweeping floors. To his neighbors, he was a ghost of a previous era, living on a fixed pension. But as the markets crashed, Reed did not panic. He did not have a mortgage to default on or a luxury lease to break. He owned 95 blue-chip stocks outright, including companies like Procter & Gamble and J.P. Morgan Chase. When he died a few years later, he left behind $8 million. This is not a fable. It is a documented probate record. Reed was the inverse of the Manhattan executive. He had converted his modest income into a reservoir of autonomy, while the executive had converted a massive income into a display of debt. This pattern repeats across every major economic fracture. In 1929, in 1987, and in 2008, the result is always the same. The visible rich are purged, while the invisible wealthy endure. We look at these events and feel a sense of security because of new regulations and government insurance like the FDIC. We believe the holes in the hull have been patched. That is the comfort the system provides to keep you participating. And we will examine why that comfort is the ultimate trap. Now you might say that the extreme invisibility practiced by Elias is an unnecessary burden in a modern economy. You might argue that we have moved past the era of the Vermont janitor and that today we have sophisticated institutional guardrails designed specifically to protect the middle-class professional. You might point to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation or the ubiquitous 401k as evidence that the system itself now handles the heavy lifting of security. This is a reasonable assumption. It is the narrative sold by every retail bank and brokerage firm in the country because it encourages you to keep your capital within their reach. But there is a fundamental disconnect between the promise of institutional safety and the mathematical reality of systemic capacity. Let us look at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This is the entity that guarantees your deposits up to $250,000, giving you the peace of mind to sleep at night. But if you examine the financial reports of the institution itself, you find a number that destroys the illusion of total security. As of the most recent reporting periods, the Deposit Insurance Fund reserve ratio stands at approximately 1.25%. Think about what that means. For every $100 sitting in the American banking system, the insurance fund holds only $1.25 in reserve. The system is not designed to survive a structural failure. It is designed to manage a localized leak. If a systemic event occurs, the insurance is not a guarantee of your wealth, but a promise of a long and uncertain administrative process. This brings us to the second failure of the apparent solution, which is the 401k. We are told this is the path to freedom. But the 401k is a duration mismatch disguised as a benefit. It locks your capital away for decades while exposing it to the fees of the very institutions managing it and the legislative whims of future tax codes. You do not own that money. You have a conditional claim on it that can only be exercised after you have traded the best years of your life for a paycheck. The neighbor in the German SUV believes he is safe because he has a high salary and a standard retirement plan. He believes the institutions are his partners, but the institutions are machines built for extraction, and the safeguards are merely the floor of a cage. The solution presented to you, which is the path of the compliant consumer, is a transfer of risk from the collective to the individual. When the market turns or the currency devalues, the neighbor has no defense because his entire life is visible and leveraged. He has traded his autonomy for the comfort of a narrative that is only 1% backed by reality. Now that we know what fails, we must look at what survives. We must examine how the invisible wealthy move from defensive saving to the offensive weaponization of their capital. We must look at how liquidity becomes a tool of power rather than just a safety net. That was the theory. Here is what happened in practice in March 2023. In a span of 48 hours, the digital age witnessed the fastest bank run in human history. Silicon Valley Bank, a pillar of the modern innovation economy, vanished. This was not a slow decay. It was a sudden evaporation of liquidity. $42 billion in withdrawal requests were processed in a single day. The visible rich, the founders with their seven-figure salaries, and the investors with their leveraged portfolios, were suddenly locked out of their own lives. They had the status, they had the high income, they had the luxury vehicles and the high-cost zip codes. But they did not have the one thing that matters when the machine stops. They did not have unencumbered autonomy. Failure was unthinkable in 1929. It was unthinkable in 2008. In 2023, it became a reality in 2 business days. This is the third occurrence of the pattern, and it closes the loop on systemic risk. The pattern is already in motion. While the social media feeds were filled with frantic posts from tech executives who could not meet payroll or pay their personal mortgages, the invisible wealthy were operating in a different dimension. For someone like Elias, a market tremor is not a crisis. It is a liquidation sale. Think about what that means. When the high-income poor are forced to sell their assets to cover their lifestyle or their debt, the person with the hidden reservoir becomes the buyer of last resort. This is the weaponization of liquidity. It is the fourth habit in action. While the neighbor in the German SUV is calculating how to survive a 60-day freeze on his credit lines, Elias is looking at the stock market and the real estate listings with the cold eyes of a predator. He is not just saving money. He is accumulating the ammunition required to colonize the future when it goes on sale. The velocity of the 2023 collapse proved that the gap between perceived success and total insolvency is narrower than it has ever been. It proved that the standard institutional guardrails are secondary to personal liquidity. The neighbor believes that his high salary and his credit score are his shield, but in March 2023 the shield shattered for thousands of people exactly like him. They discovered that their wealth was a series of permissions granted by institutions. Elias knows that true wealth is the absence of the need for permission. This contemporary demonstration destroys the psychological defense that these risks are historical relics. The mechanism is active. The extraction is continuous. You are currently evaluating your own position against this reality. If the system can freeze the accounts of the most visible winners in the economy in 48 hours, you must ask yourself what protection your own visibility provides. The answer is none. Now we must examine the final layer of the strategy, which is the transition from how you save to how you live. We must look at value-based frugality and the strategic rejection of the aesthetic of success. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. There is a pattern that connects everything we have discussed from the Vermont janitor to the Silicon Valley bank run. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is structural analysis. To understand why Elias is truly free while his neighbor is trapped, you must look at the hidden architecture of the modern economy. We are living through a massive historical shift in how power is exercised. In the industrial age, power was physical and visible. It was the factory, the land, and the mansion. In the digital age, power has become algorithmic and administrative. The system is now a giant extraction engine designed to identify and monetize every unit of your attention and every dollar of your surplus. Think about what that means. Visibility has become a tax on your future. When you buy the German SUV or the luxury watch, you are not just spending money. You are broadcasting a signal to the social and commercial algorithms that you are a compliant participant in the extraction cycle. You are signaling that your surplus is available for harvest. The system rewards this visibility with temporary status and social validation, but the cost is the permanent loss of your autonomy. This is the structural property of the visibility trap. It requires you to maintain a high velocity of spending to stay relevant within the administrative graph of your social circle. The financial ghost strategy is the only effective defense against this mechanism. It is the deliberate decision to become invisible to the extraction engine. By maintaining the lifestyle of a logistics manager while holding the capital of a hedge fund, Elias has decoupled his survival from the system's permission. He has achieved what we call the inversion of social power. In the conventional model, you use money to buy objects that command the respect of others. In the ghost model, you use money to buy the silence that protects your time from the demands of others. Convenience and safety are not the same thing. They are often opposites. The neighbor chooses the convenience of credit and the safety of social conformity. But that safety is an illusion because it relies on the continued stability of the institutions that grant him status. Elias chooses the inconvenience of an old car and the perceived risk of social invisibility. But he has traded that superficial safety for the absolute security of unencumbered ownership. You cannot freeze a relationship. You cannot impose capital controls on a secret. This is the climax of the framework. Wealth is not a collection of things you own. Wealth is the mathematical measurement of the distance between you and the need for another person's approval. The janitor Ronald Read understood this intuitively. The tech founders in 2023 learned it painfully. The neighbor in the German SUV has not learned it yet. The pattern is already in motion. Every time you choose to display your success, you are lowering the walls of your fortress. Every time you choose the silence of the ghost, you are strengthening the only reservoir that matters. The world is built to find you. Your only job is to remain hidden until you decide to move. So what does this mean in practice for someone standing in the shadow of a systemic extraction engine? It means moving from a strategy of participation to a strategy of structural positioning. To build the reservoir Elias possesses, you must evaluate the available mechanisms not as products to buy, but as containers for your autonomy. The first mechanism is the Automated Broad Market Index. This is the primary engine used by the invisible wealthy to capture the growth of human productivity without the need for active management. The advantage is clear: low fees and historical resilience across decades. But there is a catch. This strategy is a bet on the continued stability of the global financial architecture. If the architecture itself fractures, the index becomes a digital ghost. It offers growth, but it requires a stomach for volatility that most participants lack. The second mechanism is direct ownership of tangible assets. This is the path of the physical compounder. It provides a hedge against currency devaluation and offers a level of utility that a brokerage account cannot. However, tangible assets come with the friction of maintenance, the weight of property taxes, and the risk of illiquidity. You cannot sell a bedroom on a Tuesday morning to cover a sudden medical expense. Anyone who tells you there is a perfect risk-free path to the financial ghost strategy is selling something. Every choice is a redistribution of risk. I am not recommending these paths. I am documenting that they have been the structural pillars for those who, like Ronald Read, opted out of the visibility trap. The utility lies in how you structure your exposure. It is the transition from consuming the narrative of success to owning the mathematics of time. You must weigh the convenience of the institutional path against the autonomy of the independent one. This is not financial advice. This is structural analysis. But remember this: no alternative eliminates risk entirely. The only variable you control is which risks you are willing to own and which you are willing to outsource. The pattern is already in motion, and as we return to that humid afternoon in Des Moines, we see the final consequence of these choices. It is Tuesday morning in Des Moines, and the sun is just beginning to touch the shingles of the 3-bedroom ranch house built in 1978. Elias does not wake up to the frantic chime of a digital alarm or the adrenaline of a looming deadline. He wakes up to the heavy silence of a house he owns entirely. From his kitchen window, he watches the neighbor in the $60,000 German SUV pull out of the driveway across the street. The engine is a marvel of precision engineering, but the man behind the wheel is a marvel of administrative capture. He is driving toward a corporate campus he dislikes to service a debt he cannot ignore to maintain a status that provides no actual protection. He is the ultimate prisoner of his own visibility. Elias sips his coffee and looks at a simple printed brokerage statement resting on his wooden table. It is not a luxury watch or a leather-bound title. It is the cold documentation of $1.7 million in stored autonomy. To the neighborhood at the barbecue, Elias is still the man they overlook. To the neighbor, he is still the man in the faded polo shirt who stayed behind while the world moved on. But the power dynamic has inverted completely. Convenience and safety are not the same thing. They are often opposites. The neighbor chose the convenience of credit and the safety of social conformity, while Elias chose the inconvenience of an old car and the absolute safety of mathematical truth. Think about what that means. True wealth is not a collection of things you own. It is the mathematical measurement of the distance between you and the need for another person's approval. Access to a luxury lifestyle can be revoked by a bank or a layoff or a market freeze, but ownership of your time is a fortress that only you can dismantle. This is the final lesson of the financial ghost strategy. The world is an extraction engine designed to identify and monetize your surplus through the performance of success. Your only defense is to become a ghost to that engine. This channel exists to study the fractures before they become fault lines. We do not provide financial advice. We provide structural analysis of the mechanisms that operate beneath the surface of the global economy. By choosing to understand these patterns, you are positioning yourself with anticipation rather than reacting with desperation. The pattern is already in motion.